A very warm welcome to Fireside Chats. My name is Magela Pillai, and today we will be taking up the subject of the Lotus. In this series, we look at a variety of subjects surrounding spirituality, what spirituality is, how it impacts on your awareness, your consciousness, and we also ask you to look at what your relationship with God is and how you can deepen your connection with Him. I'd like to introduce you to Sister Denise, who has been practicing Rajyoga Meditation for over 40 years. Sister Denise, very warm welcome.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Sister Denise, the lotus has significance in one or two religions on the planet, and it is a significant symbol in the East, is it not?
Absolutely. It's very important, and this is why we want to take a look at the symbolic value and see how it applies to us in our spiritual life and applying spiritual perspectives to the question of our action.
And what does the lotus mean within spiritual circles?
The lotus, the speciality of the lotus is that it is growing in stagnant water, muddy water. It's all connected with all kinds of other lotuses. But when you see it, how it looks on the lotus pond, there are these large round leaves below, so you can hardly see the water. And then above the water, a couple of feet, you see the lotus, that it's completely by itself, standalone, above the water. It has these pink, rather waxy petals, and within the circle of petals, you see something like a platform, and this is where the seeds are. Each and every part of the lotus is edible, usable. So the lotus is a very important plant, and it represents the way of life of a person in the world as it really is, which is highly polluted. But you get your sustenance, the lotus gets its sustenance because the roots are under the stagnant water and in the mud. And so our sustenance, our circumstances in which we take our sustenance from the world, it's not a pure place, it's not an ideal place by any means. But having taken that sustenance, the lotus is detached and beautiful. So the lotus is also applied to the different organs of the body. They say lotus eyes, lotus lips, lotus hands, lotus feet. And when it is applied to the parts of the body like this, it means that these organs of action that are the parts of the body, they are also capable of being polluted, but when they are qualified by this symbol of the lotus, your eyes look at that which is pure, and you are detached from realities that are to do with the stagnant water and the mud. Lotus mouth or lotus lips means that everything that you say has significance, it's not worldly. Lotus hands and lotus feet represent the steps you take in your karma. So everything you do as a lotus person is to do with being detached, loving, unaffected. And so this symbol is really very helpful to remind us that this is how we should live, regardless of how the world is.
Okay, Sister Denise, detachment has a connotation of coldness about it, and it creates the impression of being unfeeling, somebody who is detached. also has an energy of being isolated, separated from the world. It's considered an unnatural state. That is, if one looks at it through non-spiritual eyes. Tell us what detachment means to you, and why is it such an important aspect within the ambit of spirituality? Because it has very little significance outside spiritual circles. You'll find people practicing honesty and sincerity and virtues like integrity, but outside the realm of spirituality, you won't find somebody saying, gee, I think I'll be detached today. Why is it significant to you?
I think the concept of detachment is beginning to come in because there's a separation being made between detachment and dissociation. And it's really dissociation that is the cold, unfeeling, cut-off interpretation. But detachment, it means that you are there, but you are not under the influence of. And this is very good for making decisions, for saying important things that you have to say when circumstances can be quite tricky and they might provoke an emotional reaction which you would subsequently regret. So detachment is a quality that really enables you to do what you have to do in a proactive way rather than a reactive way. It's non-emotional, but it is not devoid of feeling. But the feelings are more higher sensibilities than reactive emotions. So a person who's interested in detachment, who uses the symbol of the lotus to guide them in their life choices, they are really making sure that they are not adversely affected by the corruption, the pollution of the world, but they are still there with their beauty and their heart and their spirit and all of this. However, it is a refined state, and sometimes people will say something negative about the idea of detachment because a person who's detached can't really be manipulated, and those who like to run things by manipulation wouldn't like that, you see. So sometimes something bad will be said about this spiritual practice of detachment, loving and detachment, because it really puts the detached person out of range of those who seek to bring them under influence.
So, Sister Denise, how does one go about practicing the symbol of the lotus in one's day-to-day life, in the ordinary course of events?
There is a phrase that relates to the lotus, and it is said, the person is in the world but not of the world. That means that you're not worldly, you're not operating in the same way as hedonistic people, but you are concerned about purity, about integrity, and the lotus represents purity very much. And it also represents that whatever is maybe dirt is thrown on you from the world, because the petals are waxy, it's, you know, like water off a duck's back, and so that it will not stick to you. And so I think that when you start thinking about the different aspects and attributes of the lotus, and then you go about your business of the day with these thoughts in your mind, whenever something comes that can be distressing, remember, no, I'm the lotus, I'm above all this, I'm not affected, I'm the beautiful one in the midst of the mud, the pollution, whatever it is. But if the lotus pond of the world is looked at from afar, you see only the beautiful lotuses. So let me be that which is beautiful in the world, and that draws attention of the viewer.
Now, Sister Denise, the link between detachment and divinity, could you join those two dots for us? Because what comes to mind is the various Hindu deities who are shown depicted standing on a lotus. What is the link between those two?
When you're standing on a lotus, it means that your position in the world is you're not directly standing on the world. There's something in between you and the world, and that is the attitude of detachment. You interact with the world, you come into action, you do what it is you have to do, then you withdraw into your sense of your spiritual feelings, your spiritual qualities, and you continue to, resource yourself from the spiritual source, which is the Supreme Soul. So you are really sort of somewhere in between the divine and the world. And I think the position of a person in that lotus pose is that, it draws the attention of the people of the world towards something better than the problems that they experience all the time in the world. Because a person who is using the lotus, they're also detached from their own problems. They're detached from temptations, they're detached from hardships, they're detached from all the, the pairs of opposites that make you swing this way and that way. And so the detached person is really, in their own position, in their own, they are kind of setting the tone, setting the atmosphere. And this is why it draws attention. And of course, one who is depicted as a deity, what does a deity figure do is it draws the attention of people away from ordinariness. So a person who is detached will not fall into being ordinary. They will be special. They will be reflecting different qualities of God. They will be busy trying to cultivate different virtues and so on. And because of detachment, they will not get caught up in petty things. So all of these are quite useful pointers towards what best way to lead your life. Because when you're in any location with people, naturally you're under the influence of that, you're pulled by that, you're colored by that. And as much as you can practice detachment, to that extent you can actually make sure that you're colored by spirituality rather than pulled back to the worldly world, the ordinary world.
Does the detachment that you're speaking of imply any distance between you and people? Because I think that's where the sense of coldness comes in, or people's misunderstanding of it rather. I see what you mean by detaching yourself from your own negative traits, that I get. But people, what is a detached person? A person who lives their life according to the symbol of the lotus. How are their relationships with others?
There are sometimes lotuses where there are two people standing on one lotus.
Okay.
And you also have the symbol of the combined form, Vishnu or Mahalakshmi. These are Hindu deities that are combinations of the male and female on the lotus. And this refers to the fundamental unit of human society, which is the couple. And so where you have couples living a lotus life, they also are not isolated, they're definitely together, and we're talking about family, but we're not talking about dysfunctional family. And because the world is so full of dysfunctionality, a family who is living in a lotus way, in a detached way, you know, because together with the detachment comes also the word loving. So lotus means detached and loving, not swinging between loving and hating, but poised in a loving attitude, but not able to be pulled into these swings of activity and emotions that actually are the indicators of the distress that happens in current human society.
So Denise, you know, it is considered to be quite normal to have lows and highs on any given day. Okay, we may have a problem with going to the extreme of either one of those, but it's considered to be a normal day, and normal for a person to feel high and low. Why is it that within the realm of spirituality the highs and lows are discouraged and equanimity is encouraged? What is the reasoning behind that?
One of the reasons is because the highs and lows keep you in a certain dimension, and when you're trying to build your stage of spirituality, you're also trying to enter into much more subtle dimensions of being, where the highs and lows are actually something that discourage your ability or prevent you from actually entering into that. You know, a yogi is trying to go from gross consciousness through progressively more subtle consciousness to ultimately the incorporeal stage, and so all of this up and down keeps you very gross. So it's normal to be gross, but it doesn't mean that it is the only way, and there are great pleasures to be had by moving further and further into a more subtle and more stable stage. It's preferred.
It's preferred. Okay, so tell me, God, how does he fit into this picture?
Well, God is very stable. And if you are very up and down, you're in a very different framework from God. So I think that what a yogi is trying to do is become so stable that you're able to really make contact with the one who is absolutely stable, because otherwise you can't, you know, it's very subtle.
Okay, and Sister Denise, in terms of one's relationship with God, how does living a lotus life here on earth add to that?
Well, God is not of the world or even in the world like we are. And what I think the message of God is at this time is, come to me where I am and let yourself leave the world so that you can be there or not be there at will. You know, when you're caught up in the ups and downs of the world, you certainly can't leave either of them. But the more you're detached, the more you can leave them down below and get on with developing your relationship with God, which is actually the most fulfilling thing that you can have. Your relationships with people have a lot of promise, but also sometimes a lot of disappointment and a lot of disillusion, because people are trying to resource themselves from relationships with people who themselves are usually spiritually empty, and that results in mutually trying to take from one another, and there isn't much in the way of mutually sustaining one another, and this is why relationships break down after a while.
Yes, Denise, in terms of taking from God, does your highs then, if you're living a detached life, come from your relationship with God? Because you're certainly not getting it from here.
No, definitely you get incredible highs from your relationship with God, but you have to really go into the depth of it, because God is so different from the worldly world, and so beautiful and so extraordinary, that you love to fill yourself with that, and then in your interaction with the world, this is something that is emanating from you. This is something that you can contribute into the world, because the world is not really happy. And anything that you can pass on to the world that comes from God is going to make the world a better place, or the people experience their life in a little bit better way.
Sister Denise, explain to us what the difference is between detachment and, say, suppression, and detachment and isolation, detachment and coldness. Because I think there is confusion between these terminology, where you can have the veneer of detachment, okay, or remaining uninfluenced, but in the meantime there could be a world war going on inside of you.
That means you're not detached, you just want to fake it.
Okay, tell us what the difference is between these aspects of suppression and isolation and coldness.
Detachment doesn't mean cold. Detachment is that you feel all the feelings, but they don't take over, they don't take control. You are able to manage your feelings very well. And I think that a person who is not able to manage their feelings, they have to substitute that inability with, freezing over or something like this, It will cause numbness, so they don't have to deal with their feelings. A person who is detached, they feel the intensity of everything, but they're never taken over.
Okay.
So they can be compassionate.
And Sister Denise, suppression? What about suppression?
Well, if you suppress your feelings and say, I'm detached, and there's an awful lot of people who do that, then one who understands detachment will say, no, you're not. That's not detachment. You're calling it that. But what you're doing is suppression. So don't call suppression detachment when it's suppression. Call it like it is. I mean, it is true that people use euphemisms and various different words incorrectly, and maybe even somebody will say, okay, detachment means so and so and so and so, but it doesn't, So I think a lot of what we have to do is actually describe and define what a word applies to, and then use that word correctly. But it is true that a lot of people use the word incorrectly because they have a hidden agenda about it. And the agenda of making detachment look like something bad is that it justifies their inability to be detached by saying that, well, detachment is a bad thing, so you shouldn't be detached anyway. But they're not being honest, because the truth is they're unable to be detached.
So Denise, within spiritual realms, one hears the word detachment, and you also hear the term detached observer. I think you used it in this series for 2 or 3 episodes ago. Would you tell us what the link is between detached and detached observer, and what or who are you observing?
The stage of a detached observer is something you want to adopt when you are in front of a scene which is extremely distressing, or you could be in front of a scene where people or circumstances are being extremely violent towards you, something that you have no control over, but is there in front of you. And when people observe traumatic, horrific scenes, it is extremely traumatizing for them, and it disturbs them for a long period afterwards. It can scar them for life. But if you know how to practice being a detached observer, and you can become that as soon as you find yourself in such a situation, then the damage of that scene on you is much reduced, almost minimal. And at the same time, you will not do anything to provoke any further escalation of that scene. So it's an extremely good, you can say, defensive position to adopt in the face of something like this. And these days, things like that happen quite a lot, and quite a lot of people are suffering immensely from some sort of post-traumatic stress disorder because of seeing things, being in those circumstances, and it prevents them from living a normal life afterwards. Whereas the person who's a detached observer is able to get back to being normal pretty quickly and process the event in such a way that they are not scarred or traumatized by it. So it's a very, very good preventive medicine, you can say.
Yes, Denise, let us end on this note. What is the message from God as far as detachment is concerned? Why is this taught? You covered it in the course of today's lecture, but in a nutshell, as we say goodbye to our viewers.
Well, you know, this is known as the period of time when everyone's karmic accounts are coming up for settlement. And that can be a very distressing time, because everything comes to, you know, bother you, to challenge you all at once, and it can be really overwhelming. And also this is a time when a lot of things are breaking down, a lot of the structures, infrastructures and systems are breaking down. So the more people are able to be detached and get past that and know that something better is on the other side of it, the better off you are as a person, because after all, the soul is experiencing these things. The soul is the one that gets traumatized, and the soul is eternal and immortal. So whatever you can do to protect yourself while going through tumultuous times, you're better off.
Okay, thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you for a very beautiful message. I think the Lotus symbol has existed in, well, a few cultures across the world for centuries, but there are very few who understand it and are able to articulate its beauty like you just did, so thank you.
Thank you.
There you have it, brothers and sisters, the symbol of the lotus. Sister Denise has shared the importance and I think the necessity of protecting yourself using the image of the lotus, which is being detached from your own weaknesses and also creating a healthy distance between you and people, you and the world. Detachment in the spiritual sense is not coldness or isolation or any of its negative connotations, but it's simply a practice that can enable you to maintain your dignity and also draw power from God. So thank you, Sister Denise, for your message, and thank you for joining us. Goodbye.